Hello and welcome to this conversation with Lambda Legal. My name is Scott Carr from Klinedinst PC. And on behalf of the firm's Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Committee, we want to thank you so much for joining us. We will be recording this webinar, and each of our attendees should be automatically muted. Please feel free to submit any questions you might have using the questions feature on your control panel. You can ask questions at any time throughout the presentation, and we will do our best to answer your question during the live presentation. So with some of our housekeeping out of the way, I would like to turn it over to Brian Murphy, who is our moderator for today's program. Mr. Murphy is shareholder at Klinedinst, where he focuses on professional liability, transportation, and catastrophic injury cases. And without further delay, let's turn things over to Brian.
All right, thank you, Scott. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our special webinar, The Continued Fight for LGBTQ plus Equality, a conversation with Lambda Legal. For those of you who don't know me, I am Brian Murphy, and I'm a shareholder here at Klinedinst San Diego office. I am very proud to serve on the firm's Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Committee, and we are very excited to be hosting this program today. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us. In 2014, I started volunteering for Lambda Legal, co-chairing its annual fundraiser here in San Diego, which is every July on the Wednesday before Pride. In fact, we just had the event this year and it went very well, with support from Klinedinst, I might add. And if you're not familiar, Lambda is a great organization. It is the nation's oldest legal advocacy group fighting for full legal equality for LGBT people and for everyone living with HIV. Since 1973, Lambda has pursued court cases that protect and advance the rights of LGBT people. Lambda has been fighting from day one. It started life as its own first client when a panel of New York judges blocked its incorporation as a 501c3 because, in the view of those judges, Lambda's mission to help gay people was, quote, neither benevolent nor charitable. That ruling was appealed and won. And since then, Lambda attorneys have won a long list of historic cases with notable victories like Obergefell versus Hodges. That was the case that secured marriage equality. And Bostock versus Clayton County, holding that employment discrimination based on gender identity or sexual orientation is barred by Title VII. I am very excited to introduce our speaker today, Mr. John Miller, who is one of Lambda Legal's attorneys working on the front lines. Every year, Lambda gets 4,500 to 5,000 calls from individuals all over the country who are facing discrimination and desperately need legal advice. Many of Lambda's landmark cases, like the ones I just talked about, started off in exactly this way. John works for Lambda on what it calls the help desk. And that means that he is often the first attorney that speaks with individuals who reach out to Lambda for help. He hears their stories and analyzes their potential claims as part of the process that Lambda uses to identify the cases that it's going to take on. And in this role, John must be part educator, part therapist, and part attorney, helping callers to understand their rights while lending a sympathetic ear and determining grounds for legal action. And all of that comes naturally to him as an educator, previously with UC Hastings and the LA Law Library, and now as an adjunct professor at USC Gould School of Law. And we are very pleased and lucky to have him here with us today to tell us all about Lambda's big cases, past and present, the trailblazers that brought us to where we are today, and his own work for Lambda. John, thank you so much for joining us.
Brian, thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Scott, as well, and to all of Klinedinst. I really appreciate being here. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Hello, everyone. As Brian mentioned, my name is John Miller, he, him pronouns, and I am a legal help desk attorney here at Lambda Legal. Today, I'm going to be presenting a presentation to you that was modified by me, but originated with our CEO, Kevin Jennings, called Queeros. It is a combination of queer and heroes, and it examines the people who made LGBTQ history. But relevant to what I would like to speak about today, it is the people who helped make LGBTQ history possible and pave the way for Lambda Legal to do its work. So as everyone mentioned, there's a Q&A box. I will do my best to try to keep an eye on it as we are going through. But any question I miss, I promise I will answer at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, let's go ahead and we will begin our presentation. And I thought it'd be best to start by discussing those that came before the United States who are still with us today, and that's the Native American communities of this continent. Native Americans have existed here with a rich culture since time immemorial. And during that time, some communities, and I say some because I do not want to in any way paint the picture that Native Americans are a monolith. No group is a monolith, whether it's the LGBTQ community or Native Americans or any other group. But there were some communities within what we consider now the United States, which were very accepting of those who had an LGBTQ identity. In some communities like the Zuni from the Southwest in Arizona, there were individuals who we today would consider or refer to as Two-Spirit. One individual is Wiwa here that we see here. This person was how we would consider assigned male at birth, but identified as a Two-Spirit person. Two-Spirit persons across different communities like the Zuni often hold very significant roles. They take on both the masculine and feminine personas, and in doing so, they are given a higher stance within society. They often oversaw ceremonies and even bridged often the gap between what they perceived as the spiritual world and our own. This is a very different approach to LGBTQ individuals than what we later see in not only United States history, but colonial history. To kind of create a juxtaposition of what I'm talking about, let's go from talking about Native American communities where there were certain degrees of acceptance and compare that to pre-United States times, such as the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So if we look at the Massachusetts Bay Colony, one of the 13 original colonies, we can look here at what is referred to as the Body of Liberties. This was the law for the Massachusetts Bay Colony and was adopted from laws in England. You'll notice that there is this very old text here. And I did look this up. I do believe that if anyone ever wants to make a trek to Los Angeles, there is a copy of the Body of Liberties in the LA Law Library. I did check that out. But you'll see here, if you look down to right here, number 8, where my cursor is, if a man lieth with mankind as he lieth with a woman, both of them have committed abomination. They both shall surely be put to death. And we see a citation to Leviticus 20:13. This here is an old law that kind of embodies the stance that not only old Europe had, but a lot of colonists had towards LGBTQ individuals, at this time really talking about gays and lesbians. We know based off of what records we have that there was actually 2 different hangings for the crime of buggery, which is what you would define as this 8th crime right here. We know that one person was hung in Ireland in 1641, the year these laws were actually adopted. And then in 1642 in Massachusetts, we actually get the first historic record of an individual, a woman who was actually a servant, being charged with unseeming practices for having sexual relations with another woman. This is the first time in United States history, or colonial history, I should say, where there's actually a recording of someone here in the States engaging in sexual practices and then being charged for it. So this kind of is, like I mentioned, a juxtaposition from what came before the colonies and the United States. This kind of sets the groundwork for how attitudes towards the LGBTQ community, existed at this particular time. Though that being said, it would be, errant for me to say anything like this was the attitude of everyone. Obviously, there were people who advocated and queer people who existed from this time much through into today. That being said, though, this was the prominent stance by many people, especially those in power. But all that began to change really with the help of certain pioneering individuals during the late 19th century. If we go ahead and we jump a little bit in time, and this is quite a jump in time, so forgive me, it's over 200 years, we can actually thank a lot of the work in terms of organizing gays and lesbians to Magnus Hirschfeld. Now, Magnus Hirschfeld himself was not an American. Magnus Hirschfeld was a German who lived during the Weimar Republic, and he was a practicing psychologist, biologist, and focused primarily on human sexuality. Hirschfeld actually created an organization, one of the first of its kind, the Scientific Humanitarian Community, which focused on organizing and advocating for the rights of gay and lesbians. Hirschfeld had a lot of success in organizing individuals in Germany during the early 1920s and early 1930s. However, with the rise of Nazism, Hirschfeld actually was forced to flee, but he took his message on the road and went to the United States, where he would often actually discuss with individuals, primarily German American communities, the benefits and reasons why gays and lesbians should have equal rights. He often did this in German, though, because he understood that the temperament and attitudes towards LGBTQ individuals in the United States was not as progressive or open-minded as they were in Germany. And that is saying a lot, because Germany itself was not necessarily super open-minded. That being said, though, he did also advocate in English to his American crowds that they take a more expansive approach to sexuality in a way of trying to pave the road towards acceptance one day. In fact, Hirschfeld, while touring in America, caught the eye of one individual, Henry Gerber. Gerber himself was actually a German who immigrated to the United States with his family as a young man. While in America, he got an education in what it meant to be ostracized, for he himself was gay. And having heard about Hirschfeld, actually ventured back to Germany to study with him. As a result of his conversations with Hirschfeld, he actually founded a similar society by returning to the United States. So similar to that scientific humanitarian community that we discussed about with Hirschfeld, Henry Gerber actually founded the Society for Human Rights and incorporated this organization in Illinois. You can see here, this is the incorporation record, and it was from December 10th, 1924. To give you a sense of how successful this organization was, within 7 months' time, the co-founder of the Society for Human Rights actually was outed by his wife. He was a bisexual. He was outed by his wife to the police, and every member of the Society for Human Rights was arrested and charged. Gerber spent his entire life savings, which he had been working on as a post officer, to fend off the charges, which he ultimately did, having all three dismissed against him. However, what happened was this just entirely bankrupted Gerber to the point where he was unable to find work. He lost his job as a post officer. And so, needing a fresh start, he actually moved to New York City, where he joined the Army and served 17 years. During his time in the Army, both in the 1930s and during World War II, Gerber actually ran a correspondence club where he would send out mailings to individuals and discuss, the desire to see more acceptance for the LGBTQ community. And it became a way for other closeted members of the armed forces to also share their experiences. And we see here a photo of two GIs who happened to be together. And many individuals, many GIs who served in the war thought that by serving abroad, what they were going to end up doing is earning themselves some peace and acceptance at home. Unfortunately, despite serving their country, upon returning to the United States, they faced another challenge. When America shifted its focus from fighting fascism in Europe to fighting communism worldwide, including at home, the LGBTQ community came under charge. We see here this New York Times headline, "Perverts Called Government Peril." And we see here a GOP chief says they are as dangerous as the Reds. So many of you are probably familiar with the Red Scare. But during this time in the late 1940s and early 1950s, with the advent of groups like the House on Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, there was not only a look into those who maybe practiced and advocated for communism, but also individuals who were LGBTQ. This became known as the Lavender Scare. It got so bad at one point that there was congressional reports being published on different solutions to dealing with the LGBTQ community, some ranging from those that are pretty profane, all the way to other violent acts like actually firing an individual for their sexual identity. One individual who fought against these sorts of tactics was Frank Kameny. You can see him as the second person in the picket line right here. Frank Kameny was actually a federal worker who developed lenses for different types of telescopes and microscopes. In fact, his design was used in the Hubble telescope. But despite his designs laying the groundworks for a lot of different scientific achievements, Frank Kameny was actually fired from his federal job on discovery that he had sexual relations with another man. Frank Kameny was so offended that he actually joined the Mattachine Society and rallied other federal workers who had lost their jobs to protest in the Capitol to try to achieve their rights. This was actually a very successful campaign and gained a lot of different, and I would say at the time, a mix of both popular and unpopular press. But Frank Kameny was instrumental in advocating for the rights of federal workers. Now, while all this was going on during the Lavender Scare in the East Coast, we can jump over to San Francisco, where we see here that two pioneers in advocating for lesbian rights, Phyllis Lyon and Del Martin, seen here, they actually founded the Daughters of Bilitis in San Francisco, which was the first lesbian organization in the United States. As you can imagine, after World War II, when individuals came back home, the fact that individuals had served their country, but yet were treated as second-class citizens, rallied them to organize, not just within the LGBTQ movement, but in the civil rights movements and others as well. Phyllis and Del were instrumental in setting up the Daughters of Bilitis in San Francisco, and they were so successful that chapters started to spring up elsewhere, such as Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, Washington, and other cities across the United States. While they themselves did not stick with the Daughters of Bilitis, they actually founded the organization, left it in trustworthy hands, and joined the National Organization for Women. They were instrumental there as well in advocating for queer women to be part of the overall feminist movement, and advocated largely for lesbian mothers at a time when such family structures were considered taboo. In the same city, we know that individuals like Jose Julio Saria were trying to run for public office to provide some representation to the community. We see here that Jose Julio Saria was running for supervisor of the city and county of San Francisco in 1961. And it says here from an article, my platform is completely and eloquently engraved for all time on the facade of San Francisco's new Hall of Justice. To the faithful and impartial enforcement of the laws with equal and exact justice to all. That is an admirable goal, and it was one that Jose was really trying to advocate for. Unfortunately, Jose did not have very much luck as a politician, but did have and find great success as a drag queen. Jose became known as Empress Jose and was so beloved that Jose was able to really garner individuals to donate to charities to support the community. This charitable fundraising later became part of what is known as the Imperial Court System, which helped raise funds all across the country and was so popular with drag queens that it actually expanded into Canada and Mexico. So we see a lot of individuals across the country working and organizing. And that organization was not lost on those who were conducting the civil rights movement. Bayard Rustin was perhaps the intellectual and moral right hand of Martin Luther King. He was instrumental in organizing the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And he was, despite the fact, often tried to be pushed out of the civil rights movement, um, a huge proponent of tolerance. When he was ultimately about to be pushed out, individuals asked MLK how they could tolerate a homosexual within the movement. And MLK, while not exactly the most ringing endorsement of LGBTQ individuals, stated to them the common phrase, if you live in a glass house, then please cast the first stone. And this ultimately got everyone to quiet down and opened up an avenue for LGBTQ individuals to advocate for civil rights within that movement. And I would be remiss if I didn't really talk about kind of the watershed movement, the powder keg that seemingly started the LGBTQ movement in the latter half of the 20th century, and that is Stonewall. We see here this newspaper clipping from the New York Times, and I really love the energy that the protesters brought at Stonewall here. If we just read the headline, 4 policemen hurt in village raid, it says here in the first 2 paragraphs, hundreds of young men went on a rampage in Greenwich Village shortly after 3 a.m. yesterday after a force of plainclothes men raided a bar that the police said was well known for its homosexual clientele. 13 persons were arrested and 4 policemen injured. The young men threw bricks, bottles, garbage, pennies, and a parking meter at the policemen, who had a search warrant authorizing them to investigate reports that liquor was sold illegally at the bar, the Stonewall Inn on 53rd Christopher Street, just off Sheridan Square. That this movement, as you all I'm sure are aware, really was started by 2 trans women, Sylvia Rivera as well as Marsha P. Johnson. Them, along with their allies, threw bricks through that Stonewall Inn window and started what we now consider the modern LGBTQ rights movement. In fact, I don't know if it's necessarily, I'd have to ask William Tom, the founder of Lambda Legal, if this was his catalyst and inspiration, but I'm sure it was, because only a few years after Stonewall, William J. Tom founded Lambda Legal. We see here from another New York Times clipping, and by the way, we really do need to thank the New York Times for kind of memorializing LGBTQ history here, even if they weren't always in support of it. Here it says, from their Metropolitan Briefs, homosexual legal aid group set up. The formation of a fund to provide free legal counsel for homosexuals was announced by William J. Tom, a lawyer in New York City. Mr. Tom said the group, the Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund, was designed to aid homosexuals in the way that similar organizations assist Blacks, Puerto Ricans, and members of other minority groups. He added that the fund was expected to be in operation by the end of the year. Now, as we discussed earlier on here when Brian was doing his very kind introduction, Lambda Legal was actually its own first client. Upon appealing a denial of its right to incorporate, it successfully incorporated and began representing the LGBTQ community. This was, of course, in the mid-70s. If we jump just a decade later, we now know that this was considered the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. Thanks to advocates like Larry Kramer, plus countless others, people were becoming aware that this disease was disproportionately targeting the LGBTQ community, particularly gay men. This became a rallying cry for LGBTQ groups. We see here a bunch of students visiting the US Capitol, and you can actually see the gentleman in the purple shirt there in front. That is our CEO, Kevin Jennings, the founder of Gleason, then GLSTN, the Gay and Lesbian Schools and Teachers Network. But thanks to individuals rallying for those suffering from HIV, it was brought to the attention of Lambda Legal that one individual, Dr. Joseph Sonnabend, was opening a clinic in Greenwich Village to address those who were suffering from the disease. Dr. Sonnabend was actually from South Africa and a researcher in pathology. And when the AIDS epidemic decided to open up in Ground Zero to kind of address those who had nowhere else to turn. In doing so, in opening his clinic, he actually angered a lot of the other tenants of the building who insisted that Sonneborn be evicted in fear that it would lower their property value if he operated this clinic. Lambda Legal came to the aid and received one of its very early victories in defending Dr. Sonneborn's clinic, which he operated until the early 2000s before retiring to England. So this is one of Lambda Legal's early successes. Lambda Legal also took on the Bowers v. Hardwick case, which unfortunately was not very much a success. It upheld Georgia's law against sodomy. Years later, though, in Romer v. Evans, Lambda Legal found success in that 1996 decision, which itself paved the way for perhaps one of our most landmark decisions, especially remarkable for those who maybe went to law school in the late 2000s and 2010s, Lawrence v. Texas. This is probably the cornerstone of most people's constitutional law class, at least part of it. Here we see another New York Times headline. This is why I'm giving them a shout out. 6-3 legalize gay sexual conduct and sweeping reversal of the court's 86 ruling. That is, of course, a reference to Bowers. Here in Lawrence, they acknowledged that sodomy laws in Texas were themselves unconstitutional. In that same year, Lambda Legal had success in defending the right of individuals to marry in Massachusetts. This is really a second powder keg in the movement, in which now marriage equality was becoming a real possibility. We see just years later in 2008, when the California Supreme Court reversed its marriage cases, that individuals were able to be married. We see here Governor Gavin Newsom with the founders of the Daughters of Bilitis. We got Dell on the left and Phyllis on the right. They were, in fact, the first couple married in California after the reversal. We also had, during this time, in 2009, we see here President Barack Obama shaking hands with Frank Kameny, the person who rallied all of the federal workers. Barack Obama was signing in protections, recognizing the rights of LGBTQ federal workers. And then just 6 years later, we get the case which most of you are probably familiar with, Obergefell v. Hodges, which cemented and made sure that the right to marry was nationwide. This is probably one of the largest, if not the largest, success of Lambda Legal in this case. But I can assure you all, despite all of our successes and even our defeats, Lambda Legal's work is still cut out for it. Today, to jump a little bit more ahead in time, we are facing unprecedented attacks on the community. We see here, this is a chart of anti-LGBTQ plus attacks. We see here in 2022, there were a total of 267 anti-LGBTQ plus bills introduced across the United States. Of those 267 that were introduced, 27 passed. I would say just 27, but I believe that any of these bill passing is too much, and 240 did not. Now, if we compare this though to 2023, you see a 91% jump. We see here that we go from 267 to 510 bills introduced across the country. Of those 510, 84 actually were passed. And then in this year, this is going to, I believe, as of July 30th of this year, 527 bills had introduced, already surpassing 2023, and 44 of them, introduced, and 44 had passed. And those are in 14 states: Alaska, Florida, Idaho, Iowa, Kansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, New Hampshire, Ohio, South Carolina, Tennessee, Utah, West Virginia, and Wyoming. But, to give you a sense of where we're working, here is the map graphically showing those 510 bills introduced in the United States in 2023. This shows you the 23 states where those 84 bills passed. This is a comparison between the two now, where bills have passed in the 14 states. in 2024. So this to show you that again. And here is where Lambda Legal is fighting back. So even though marriage equality was won, we're still facing a lot of hate. And admittedly, this hate, it's directed towards everyone, but the people who bear the brunt of it the most are our trans and non-binary brothers and sisters and siblings, because they themselves have become the target of a lot of these laws. But this isn't to say that America is alone in its problems. We see here on the global stage that even though LGBTQ rights are threatened everywhere, the countries in red are those in which you are criminalized for being part of the LGBTQ community. You may notice that Russia and China, which are often in the headlines for their LGBTQ discriminatory policies, are not featured there, while there are laws that try to curb the rights of the communities in those countries. It is not itself illegal to be LGBTQ there. And in addition to those countries that criminalize LGBTQ persons, there are also those countries where it is punishable by death to be an LGBTQ member. So this is to say that our work isn't just nationwide, but we're part of a larger movement abroad to try to strengthen the rights of our community wherever we can. Some of the work that we're focusing on now, and some of the cases that are now before the Supreme Court, which have been granted cert, are ones like our our plaintiff here, Becky Pepper Jackson is her full name. And she had a case in West Virginia. This is a message actually from Becky's mother. It says, "Hello, you should know that on Mother's Day, this is of this year, as a mother, I am celebrating the organization that is fighting for my daughter. Your organization has helped me keep this child here on Earth safe and thriving. Becky is so happy thanks to Lambda helping her fight for what's right. Lambda Legal appealed a discriminatory law that would have banned trans youth from competing in sports in West Virginia. That law was enjoined, and then unfortunately individuals appealed it, and now it's before the Supreme Court. We also have another case which may have caught headlines for individuals. This is a case that we are partnering with the ACLU and the Department of Justice, and it's Scrametti v. Tennessee. In Scrametti, they imposed a law that provided, or rather I should say, denied gender-affirming care for transgender youth. And we are fighting that law today to try to make sure that everyone has access to the medical care that they need, and they are fully recognized as individuals. Now, this has been an overview of a lot of the litigation that we do as an organization to fight for the rights of individuals. It's also been a history of the LGBTQ community to show you kind of the people who laid the groundwork for us to organize and to do our work here at Lambda today. What I wanted to do, though, was also talk to you about what I do. As Brian mentioned, and I appreciated the way you described it, Brian. I'm actually going to adopt that going forward, part educator, part therapist, and part lawyer. That is a great way to describe what we do at the help desk. But I am a legal help desk attorney. The legal help desk, as we see here, is the front line of the organization, fielding calls from all across the country. It provides legal resources and information to community members in need. We analyze incoming calls to spot and highlight trends in the type of issues people are facing. And we share intakes with other parts of our legal department to identify potential issues and plaintiffs. As Brian mentioned, we see anywhere between 4,500 to 5,000 calls a year, and those are fielded by just 4 of us on the legal help desk. Many of our cases have actually started out at the help desk from us spotting novel issues or issues that we believe could be further litigated to better define the rights of our community. To give you a sense of the type of issues that we see, I went ahead and pulled some data for you all yesterday, and we actually just moved to a new database. So forgive me that it's not up to last month's data, but this will give you a good sense nonetheless. So here we see help desk calls from January 1st through April 30th of this year. And you see I divided it into 3 different categories: sexual orientation, gender identity, and HIV. And we have issues ranging from criminal law all the way to issues specific to the youth, right? And this could be family law, whether there are criminal issues related to the youth, or just child welfare. The two areas where I've noticed trends and my colleagues have noticed trends as well are in the areas of harassment, as well as what you see down here, T and B, G and C. That's our trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming legal issues. You'll see here that across the board, we have 158 harassment-related calls due to sexual orientation, 130 to gender identity, and 23 for HIV. And then here for T and B, G and C, you see here that there are no columns for sexual orientation or HIV, though there are certainly overlaps with gender identity and HIV, but you'll see that there are 97 related to gender identity. To break this down for you a little bit more so you can understand the nuance of what we're seeing, I have shown here just to kind of highlight how gender identity has become a focus. You'll see under harassment, we have a lot related to criminal, education, employment, healthcare, housing, public accommodations, and youth. To give you an example of the type of intake that I see, and the ones that really kind of shake me the most is when you have an individual call, often maybe a parent when it's related to the youth, right? Because whenever we get a minor calling, we always try to explain to them their rights and the limitations to them. But when a parent calls us, they're often calling in crisis because they're very worried about their child. For example, I had someone call recently saying that their non-binary child had participated in a historical figure, like show and tell. I think many of us probably did this in elementary school. You choose a historical figure from American history and then talk about them. And the child chose Sally Ride. The child then talked about Sally Ride and mentioned Sally Ride's sexual orientation. The teacher then condemned the child, as did other classmates. They started picking on the child. And then it ultimately turned into the parents protesting, and then the school administration standing by the teacher and condemning the child for choosing Sally Ride, even though Sally Ride was featured on the list of individuals who students could talk about. So this creates a lot of crisis for families who are just trying to keep their child safe while ensuring that they receive a fair and equitable education. On the T and B, G and C side, we see similar issues such as ID documentation. Sometimes when people reach out to us regarding documents, they're really reaching out to us for vital records. They want to know how to do a name or gender marker change. Sometimes it's going to be for a birth certificate. Sometimes it's going to be for a driver's license. But we do get individuals calling about things like marriage licenses or passports, right? Other federal documentation as well. And some of these calls, admittedly, are individuals who just don't know where to begin. So we often educate them on the process in each jurisdiction, depending on where they are. Sometimes these individuals are calling because they're facing unreasonable delays, right? And the delays are often juxtaposed with individuals who are not either gay, lesbian, bisexual, or trans, who get their paperwork done rather quickly. So we often help individuals there. And then you'll see here anti-T and B bills. Those are trans and non-binary bills. Whenever a new bill is introduced across the country, whether it's, like I said, introduced, being debated, or it's passed, unfortunately, we see an uptick at the desk. In years past, for example, when Texas was having some investigations into hospitals providing gender affirming care to youth, we saw upticks there from concerned parents and individuals across the state regarding those investigations. So this is to give you a little bit of a sense of the work we do at the help desk. I often think of it as being some of the most rewarding work I've done. I came from a policy background working with tribes, Native American tribes, that is, and then I was an educator for a long time, and then a public educator, and kind of being able to combine all the skills I've learned to provide and help my community has been a really blessed experience for me, and it's one that's really rewarding, I would say. It does have its hardships, but I wouldn't choose to do anything else, especially right now when everyone's facing so many attacks from so many different sides. It's really I'm honored to be able to do this work. And that being said, if you ever yourself are curious on how you can get involved, I always like to say you can use your voice, talk to people about these issues. The best way to change hearts and minds is to have open dialogue about them. I feel in a time where people want to put up walls, sometimes tearing them down is the best thing you can do. The other thing you can do is vote. I mean, we hear this all the time. We're going to hear it now during an election cycle. Voting is important. Time. Volunteering your time, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can do that in a moment, but volunteering your time, whether it's for Lambda Legal or another LGBTQ nonprofit, it's going to be appreciated. Trust me on that. We always need more hands to help. And then I would be remiss if I did not say that any charitable organization always runs on money. And so if you have money to donate, that's also a way you can help support organizations like our own. One way you can donate your time, though, to us is by joining our community attorney directory. For those who are familiar with Lambda Legal's work, you may have heard this before as the Cooperating Attorney Network. We're going through a rebranding. We got a new database, so we got a new title for this year. But the community attorney directory, if you're interested, you can scan the QR code at the top right of the screen right now, and that will take you to a page where you can read more about it and sign up. But just so I can explain a little here, we like to consider it as part of joining the movement for equality. Participating attorneys serve as a resource to help individuals in their search for legal advice and consultation. You can assist with issues related to sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, and HIV in your practice area. And just so you know, there is no obligation to ever take on anyone who you might connect with through becoming a community attorney. Rather, it's just a resource for people to reach out. Just how we tell them it's good to interview a prospective attorney, you have, no obligation to assist, interview them, and determine if they're a good prospective client as well. But it's a great resource for individuals, especially because Lambda Legal, we have a legal department that's about 50 people large. We do not have the ability to take on more than about 60 cases a year. And we at the help desk do not actually provide legal advice. We just provide legal education. And so often of those 5,000 calls we get, the greatest resource we can give them beyond information about their rights is how they can connect with someone who could provide them assistance. So that's a great way to get involved. We're going to have some time for questions in a moment, and I'm happy to answer as many as you all have. But if you do have any additional questions or you want to discuss any issues, what we do partially on the legal help desk is we do get attorney callers who may call us when they have an LGBTQ related or HIV related issue. If you happen to come across one, you're more than welcome to reach out to either me personally with my information here, or you can always contact us at our Western Regional Office, which is located in downtown LA. You can either contact us on our website, up at the top here, another QR code for you, or you can go ahead and email us at legalhelpdesk@lambdalegal.org. Now, before I jump into questions here, I wanted to go ahead and just note this quote from Coretta Scott King, because I think it's something to be mindful of. As we've seen with all the different historical movements that I discussed, freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in every generation. And I think that's a good mantra and motto to have. The other one I was toying with, which I'll just mention here, is by Coretta Scott King's husband, Martin Luther King Jr., which is an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I was toying between the two, but Coretta won out. But I think those are both good quotes and mottos to live by. So with that, I want to go ahead and say thank you very much and open the floor to any questions you all may have.
All right, very good. Well, thank you, John. I'm looking at our questions here, and actually, before I get to anyone else's questions, I have a question.
Sure.
I am getting married in November, which I never thought I would say, and I see that the Supreme Court has been changing, and there are a lot of worrisome things happening there, and it makes me wonder if my marriage is going to be legally recognized in a few years. Do you think I've got a good reason to be worried about that, and what can I do about it?
So what I will say is that we've had talks about this, And we, I'm not going to say this is an official sense of Lambda, but it's something that we've discussed. And I don't think it's very likely that those marriages that have taken place will be nullified in any way. That's what I knock on wood and hope. But the reality is that for those who get married in the future, much later than November, more likely, there is the possibility that the right to marriage across the nation could cease to exist. I mean, we know this not because they have taken any particular action yet against it, but if you look at the Dobbs decision, the one that overturned Roe v. Wade, you notice that in Clarence Thomas's concurrence, he talks about how we should look at other rights that exist, and he specifically lists in there that Obergefell is something that the court should re-examine. That is not something that people should take lightly. I always tell people to not take concurrences or dissents lightly. There is a possibility, right? I mean, this is part of the reason why it's important to speak up with your voice and to vote, I would say. So if you want to talk about action, voting is very important here because that'll help ensure that we have a court that defends LGBTQ rights. But also, the reality is that if something were to happen and the court were to reverse Obergefell, it's going to look much now like it does with the Dobbs decision, where it creates like a patchwork across the country of different states having the right to marry and those that don't. The reality is that those living in states where the right to marry is honored are going to be in a much better position than others. But without trying to pull out a crystal ball and determine if and when that'll happen, I will just knock on wood and hope and say that we can try to prevent that in the vote with voting. And if it does happen, know that Lambda Legal will surely fight against it. So that's what I would say. But also, congratulations, Brian. That'll be exciting in November.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it will. We do have a few other questions from the audience here. Here's a good one. All right. So what do you think is the single largest threat that's facing the LGBT community today?
So, when I talk at a lot of different places, people ask me a question like this, and the reality is that it's twofold, right? I would say that beyond the law, beyond court decisions and bills, the one thing that's really challenging the community is hate. It is something that is pervasive in every one of those harassment calls that I was showing you. Those are some often the hardest calls to hear because they are often the ones where people are not just facing like a loss of the ability to go eat at their favorite restaurant, right? But they're actually being publicly humiliated and kind of discorned, right? And that is really something that I think is an issue. And that's related to the other problem that I believe the community is facing, and that's misinformation. I believe that there is a Center for Public Information at the University of Washington, and also the Williams Institute at UCLA does some research on this, but they have seen that in the last 5 years, it was like a 200, 300% uptick in misinformation related to LGBTQ individuals. I mean, we see this all the time with individuals attacking, like drag reading hour and things like that, right? Calling people names unjustifiably that are unfounded in any fact. I feel that those two things feed off each other, right? In a way that's super unhealthy, but unfortunately is pervasive throughout, the United States. Sadly, one of the things I will say is that the media is a huge perpetrator of this. And that's why it's really important to also kind of stay literate on issues and kind of keep abreast of what's happening. One of the things we deal with at the help desk a lot is individuals coming to us feeling like they're helpless because they've read a news article that says that there's no hope for them, when really that's not the case. Oftentimes, just because someone's discriminated against doesn't mean that discrimination is lawful, right? And so we often have to educate them on it. But people do come to us feeling like they're hopeless because misinformation has told them this is what you deserve being in our society. And that's one of the things that we counteract. And, we depend on individuals like you to help us in trying to tear down those walls and spreading truth, and rather than all these falsities.
Well, we depend on Lambda too, so thank you for everything you do. We have a question about Bostock. How about that? So
Fun.
that's that actually, and for myself too, Bostock surprised me because I didn't think that we would see the Supreme Court say that Title VII protects the LGBT community from employment discrimination. The makeup of the court has changed since then, and are there already challenges to Bostock in the works?
I mean, it'd be, I can't say that there are not. I mean, one of the things that is also on the table in, uh, Clarence Thomas's different rights that should be taken away is Bostock, right? Bostock is another law that some justices feel should be revisited. While there has certainly been guidance issued by the EEOC that has come out to try to strengthen Bostock and make it more robust, such as making it so that individuals can't be misgendered. I don't want to deny anyone by saying or deny saying that there aren't going to be challenges, because certainly there will be, right? I mean, if anytime there is a group who is hated gets a right, there is going to be a challenge to it. But what I will say though is that Bostock has been a boon to the community. It is something that I think we were all surprised by, given the makeup of the court. And while it has changed, again, pulling out that crystal ball, I don't want to do too much, but I am optimistic in how much guidance has been issued to try to strengthen it going forward from the administration side. So we'll have to see, but I'm cautiously optimistic. That's the best way to put it.
That's much more encouraging than what I thought.
Listen, I try to shine positivity and optimism in at least in my work, because it's the one way to help us get through it, right? And to try to stay focused on what the goal is, which is acceptance and equality.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay. Next question. So, all right, this is good. So we had Kevin Jennings speak to us either last year or the year before, and it was last year, and he talked about Alabama's felony healthcare ban and whether it would survive constitutional challenges, and that was part of this wave of anti-trans legislation that we're seeing all over the country. And you talked about that already a bit today. So checking in, it's been a year since we heard about this. What is happening with those sorts of laws? Are they surviving constitutional challenges? Are they making progress or not?
I mean, I would have to say that a fair amount of those laws, I mean, they're still being passed, right? Like they're still being introduced. Some are being passed. When it comes to the constitutionality of them, right? I mean, one of the cases that we have going before the court now, right, is that Scrimeti case I mentioned in Tennessee, right? That case in particular deals with youth gender affirming care, but that is going to create ripples, right? Whatever the decision is in that case, and we're hopeful and optimistic. We're gonna have some success here, but whatever happens in that case, the ripples will affect other parts of the community, right? So talking about trans prisoners, gender affirming care, if it's denied to the youth, it could be denied to prisoners as well. It's something that we'll have to kind of wait and see. But what I would say though, in terms of staying abreast of these sorts of issues, is I can circulate a link after this too, Brian, is that our newsletter that goes out every week usually has case updates, right? And it also includes information on bills that are particularly of note, I would say, or worry, depending on how you want to see it. And that's a good way of keeping up on it. But, like I said, we have a case related to this issue going before the court, and so we'll have to see. But keep your eyes on October for the arguments, and next June for the decision.
We'll do that. We'll keep our fingers crossed, and we'll be cautiously optimistic, as you've taught us to be.
Yes, I think, maybe that would be the tagline of this presentation: cautiously optimistic.
Would you like to change the title, Scott? Maybe we can. It actually is too late to change the title because we are just like 1 minute from running out of time here. So I think that'll have to have been our last question. Huge thank you to John for taking the time to talk with us today. if you want to help support Lambda, Scott has, I believe, dropped, yes, he's dropped a link into the chat where you can make donations. And every dollar helps. The firm has been a great supporter of Lambda. And on behalf of everybody here at Klinedinst, thank you again, John. We appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for watching us today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good
Thanks,
day.
Brian. Thank you, John. And thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the ideas and discussion. We are so appreciative to our hosts, John Miller from Lambda Legal and Brian Murphy from Klinedinst. On behalf of our panelists and everyone at Klinedinst PC, we appreciate you joining us and taking time out of your busy schedule to learn more about the important work of Lambda Legal. And for more information on this and other DEIB webinars from Klinedinst, we would encourage you to visit deibwebinar.com, as we will have more webinars coming online in the future. With that, we close out our webinar. Thank you so much for joining us and hope you have a great day.